Hello and welcome to this Tungsten Operator Masterclass, where we take a look at how you would deploy the Tungsten Operator itself and a cluster within Tungsten Operator. My name is Chris Parker, VP of Customer Success here at Continuant. In this short course, we're going to first of all recap what Tungsten Operator is. If you haven't yet watched the previous video, which is the introduction to Tungsten Operator, it would be useful to view that first. I'll do a quick recap of what the operator is in this session, but I won't go into the level of detail that was in that initial introductory session. We'll have a look at the prerequisites for a deployment, and then we'll look at how to install the operator, install a cluster within the operator, and then we'll also quickly take a look at the kubectl plugin, which will give you some easy access to the cluster once it's deployed. So first of all, what is Tungsten Operator? So Tungsten Operator is essentially a Kubernetes native automation system designed to manage MySQL database clusters using the Continuant Tungsten clustering technology. You can think of it like a robotic database administrator. It automatically takes care of the difficult tasks such as setup, maintenance, and protection of your MySQL databases in a Kubernetes environment. For non-technical users, imagine you need several copies of your critical data stored in different locations, always synchronized, and ready to take over instantly if one copy fails. Using proven Tungsten clustering as the technology, Tungsten Operator enables this through the Kubernetes environment. For technical users, Tungsten Operator is a Go-based Kubernetes operator built with controller runtime. It implements the operator pattern to manage MySQL clusters and Tungsten clustering, offering built-in replication, automated failover, backup management, and operational workflows. In short, Tungsten Operator simplifies complex database management, increases reliability, and reduces the need for manual intervention. Tungsten Operator is designed to run in a wide range of environments, from development to full-scale production and across different cloud platforms. For development and testing, it works seamlessly with lightweight Kubernetes distributions like Kind or Minikube. You can even run it on a single node for simple dev setups. Mini-IO integration also allows developers to test backup workflows locally without relying on cloud services. In production environments, the operator supports multi-zone clusters to provide geographic redundancy and disaster recovery. It can work with external load balancers for production-grade traffic management and integrates with enterprise storage classes such as high-performance SSDs. A full monitoring stack with alerting ensures observability and reliability. When it comes to cloud platforms, Tungsten Operator is cloud agnostic. On Amazon EKS, it integrates with S3 for backups. On Google GKE, it supports GCS and regional persistent disks. On Azure AKS, it connects to Azure Blob Storage. And for on-premises, it runs on VMware, OpenStack, or even bare metal Kubernetes environments. This flexibility means Tungsten Operator can fit into virtually any deployment scenario, whether it's a developer laptop, a global enterprise cluster, or a hybrid cloud environment. So let's take a look at what the prerequisites are. First of all, you need a Docker registry, and this is where we load all of the packages and the software into to enable you to deploy the software into your Kubernetes environment. You obviously need a pre-configured Kubernetes cluster. The minimum version we require is version 1.25. We recommend a minimum of 3 nodes. And in terms of the memory requirements, you would need at least 1 gig for the Tungsten Manager processes, 2 gig for Tungsten Replicator, 1 gig for the Tungsten Connector. And then in terms of MySQL, this will be something that you would determine based on your own expected MySQL usage, number of clients you expect to connect, the type of queries you're running, and all of those kinds of things that you would need to consider when building out a MySQL database. Additionally, Cert Manager is required, and that would be at minimum version 1.16. These versions may change over time, so please do always review our online documentation to see the latest prerequisite minimum requirements. Additionally, you would need a staging host. The staging host is obviously where you initiate the deployment from. This staging host would need connectivities to the Kubernetes cluster and the Docker registry. Obviously, it would then also require Docker. A kubectl would be installed as part of the install script, but if you wanted to install it manually, you need to do that. You need a configured staging directory. We recommend opt Continuant software. That's just the standard path that we use across all of our products. So if you're familiar with our products, it'll keep everything the same. An operating system user to do this with. We recommend a user called Tungsten. Again, this is the same user that we recommend for all of our products. So again, it keeps it standard. A couple of optional prerequisites there would be Kind if you wanted to do a local deployment rather than a production environment. And you may choose to have the various CLI tools for AWS, GCP, etc., depending upon your cloud environment, if that's applicable. So what do we do in terms of installing? Well, first of all, you need to actually download and unpack the images. So there are two sets of images and packages that you need. First will be the Tungsten Operator packages, and then there'll be the actual Docker images themselves. So if you head to our website, www.continuant.com, log in with your credentials, and from there you'll be able to access the download portal, which will give you access to the products based on your licenses. From there you can download Tungsten Operator. I'm showing on here the screen. There's a little tab at the top that's circled in red. So you would need to click Docker and Kubernetes. From there you would need to download the latest Tungsten Operator package. And then you would need to download the Docker package for cluster. Depending upon your environment, either the AMD64 or the ARM64. Obviously choose the one that is applicable to you. You would download those to your staging host into the opt-continuant software directory, and you would uncompress and unpack them. The Docker images for the software, when you extract them, they have tar files within them, which is an individual tar file for each component. So one for connector, one for manager, one for replicator. You don't need to unpack these tar files. You only need to unpack and uncompress the original file that you download from our website. So just do that once, and that will then give you all of the other files that you need within that Tungsten Docker images path. Once you've got those files, you then need to load these into the Docker registry. I'm not going to go through all of the individual commands here on the example. All of this is also in our online documentation, docs.continuant.com. So please do consult that when you're ready to do this. Obviously, you could also watch this training session multiple times, pause it, access the PDF versions of these slides and get the commands from there. But as I say, they are in the documentation as well. So don't worry about making notes of all of this right now. Step one there is loading the files into the Docker registry. Step two, retrieve the authentication token. If you're not using AWS, this may not be applicable. So obviously depending upon where your registry is, etc. This is obviously one example. We then need to tag the images in your registry, and then you would push them up as that final step. Once you've got them registered, you can then execute the install.sh script. This is a very simple wizard. It will ask you some questions. You can either accept the defaults or change them, and that will then do the deployment for you. It will then give you an example syntax at the bottom there using kubectl apply, which we'll come on to in the next few slides, and we'll talk about that. Ultimately, once that is done, that's the operator deployed and now ready for you to configure your cluster. So first of all, it's all controlled by YAML files. So in the packages that you've downloaded, there'll be lots of example YAML files for different topologies to enable, disable various different options. I'm not going to go into detail of every single YAML file in this session. There are quite a few. So go to that documentation that I mentioned before. You'll see a table there outlining all of the YAML files available and what they actually do. So you can choose these examples for your deployment and customize them to suit. Just one point of note is if you are wanting to set up an active passive or an active cluster, currently they can only be deployed in the same region. Obviously, if that changes, that will be explained in our online docs. So just keep an eye on that in case anything changes between when you're watching this training session and when you actually go to deploy it if newer versions are released. So yeah, once you've got those files, choose the ones, customize them to suit, and then you are ready to do the deployment. Before you do that, you need to decide on passwords. Now you can either allow the cluster to generate the passwords for you, or you can use a YAML file to do it. So you've got the YAML files that I talked about in the previous slide, which cover all of the various different topologies. There will also be a YAML file example in there called MySQL passwords, where you can set the passwords that you want for the MySQL root database, your application password, which is what the Tungsten managers will use for communicating to the cluster, the replicator password, so what the replicators will use for replicating the data, and then the password for the REST API admin user. So you can define them if you wish in this MySQL passwords YAML file. As I say, you can let the cluster generate them for you if you want, or you can set them up here. Again, point of note here, the passwords can only be set when the cluster is created for the first time. If you then choose to change the passwords after a cluster is deployed as part of your normal password rotation, you would just do that manually within the software itself. You won't use the YAML files to change passwords. The YAML files are just for that first initial creation. Further to that, if you are familiar with Tungsten clustering and you wish to make some changes to the various properties that you would typically find in the Tungsten INI file, if you're familiar with the INI file, then you can do that again through this YAML file. So within the YAML file that you have selected or you're building to deploy your cluster, you can set up a section within the YAML file called Custom Tungsten INI Properties. And as you'll see on the example here, you can see it twice. There is one set of INI properties underneath configuration, and there is also one set underneath the actual data services and the data service east itself. The reason they're two separate areas custom Tungsten INI properties within the configuration at the top. That would be the equivalent of you placing those properties within the defaults stanza of your INI. And if you do the custom Tungsten INI properties within the cluster itself, within the data service, that would be the equivalent of putting those properties within the service name stanza. So that's how you would differentiate the two. Any of the valid INI properties that you're familiar with, they can be placed in this YAML file. And if you want a full list, again, look at our clustering docs. There's hundreds of different INI properties that you can set. But if you want to override any or add any in here, you can do that. By default, the example files will just be a very typical cluster with various defaults for these properties. So you've got all your YAML files ready, you've got your passwords file ready if you're using it, you've updated your actual cluster YAML file, you've added in necessary custom properties that you want, enabled any other features that you want, you're ready to deploy it. How do you do that? Well, you just literally use, as the example here on the screen, kubectl apply -f and then the YAML file. If you are setting the passwords, always apply the password file first and then apply the cluster configuration YAML file. If you do it the other way around, as I say, the passwords are automatically generated. So if you don't supply that file first, you do the cluster one first, your custom passwords it'll get a bit confusing. So yeah, always do the passwords one first and then your custom one. So that brings us on to the kubectl plugin. What is it? Well, it's there to simplify the management of Tungsten clusters. It is installed automatically as part of the install sh script, as I said at the very beginning. However, if you want to deploy it, have it set up on your staging host beforehand, you can do it manually. The install script will check. If it's there, it won't install it. If it's not there, it will install it. Two easy to use actions. So there's the backup action and then the cluster action. For example, kubectl tungsten backup create, supply a backup name, various flag and options on there, and that will create you a backup. With the cluster option, kubectl tungsten cluster, and then you can do cctrl and a cluster name and it will open up a shell session to that cluster for you. Or you could do kubectl tungsten cluster switch and that will initiate a switch of the primary node. These are just a couple of examples. There are a whole list of various actions that you can use with the kubectl plugin, and they're all explained in our online docs with examples of how to use them. Also, all of the different flags that you can supply to each of these options are there. So for example, kubectl tungsten cluster switch on its own will just initiate a switch as you do with the cluster anyway in cctrl. But if you wanted to, you could supply the name of a host there if you wanted to switch to a specific host. All of those options are explained in our online documentation. So to summarize, what have we learned? We recapped what Tungsten Operator is. We explored the prerequisites for deployment. And then we went through what you actually need to do to install the operator. So downloading the packages onto your staging host, and then all of the steps that you need to get them into your Docker registry. And then using the YAML files, how you can actually then go on to deploy a cluster using the kubectl plugin. So thank you for your time. I hope you found this session useful, and I look forward to welcoming you on another session soon. Take care. Goodbye.